Hello to all my listeners out there. This is another podcast episode from Crisis Control, and today we will be discussing a few of the communication traditions. I want to begin by asking you to imagine a world where no verbal communication is allowed. How might you interact? How are you going to communicate or decode messages with others and relay your message clearly? Essentially, when I think about the broad communication field, I like to picture the 7 traditions as a piece of each of the puzzle. Each adds their own dimension and builds a larger picture, and without them, we are unable to effectively communicate. Today, we're going to cover 4 of the 7 primary communication traditions. We will also hear from 3 guest speakers who are experts in their field. I will give some input from my background experience, as well as one professor here at Winona State. Let's introduce our first guest speaker.
Hi there, I'm Ava Walters. I'm an expert in public speaking, and I will be speaking on the rhetorical tradition.
Hi there, I'm Josh Pudwell. I am a research scientist, and I will be talking about the phenomenological tradition.
I'm Ava Wilson. I'm a lawyer, and I will be talking about the critical tradition.
Your host, Elena Johnson. I am a museum and cultural heritage director and will be adding in some snippets of the sociocultural tradition. Let's start off with defining some of our terms.
So, rhetoric was originated in ancient Greece. It is described by the Macmillan Encyclopedia as the art of using language for communicating information and for intellectual and emotional persuasion.
Yeah, and adding on to that communication, phenomenology is the study of how people experience and make sense of the world around them from a first-person subjective point of view. The goal is to understand the lived experience of a specific phenomenon rather than seeking a scientific, casual explanation for it.
Critical tradition in communication is defined as how the media represents certain people in marginalized groups.
Sociocultural tradition is the process through which individuals construct their reality through shared cultural norms and practices. So these are small, everyday interactions that shape a larger social order. Now, let's hear from our first guest speaker, Ava. As a public speaker and a researcher in the field of rhetoric, tell me a little bit about the background and some people that you founded your research off of.
Yeah, so one of the main people in rhetoric is Aristotle. He was a big part in progressing what rhetoric is today. Carden states that Aristotle described persuasion as an art of proving something true or false and identified 3 ways to offer that proof.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about those 3 ways.
Yeah, so they were ethos, logos, and pathos, which is source credibility, logical appeals, and emotional appeals.
All right, and tell our listeners what makes this tradition stand out from the other ones we're going to be talking about today.
It is actually the oldest of all 7 traditions. It is thousands of years old.
That is so cool. Let's hear from our guest speaker, our professor here at Winona State, who studies rhetorical tradition. Please introduce yourself and your expertise.
Sure. I'm Adam Gaffey, and I teach in the Department of Communication and Media, expertise in rhetorical studies.
All right, and how would you define the rhetorical tradition?
The rhetorical tradition is interested in using communication to help people be better citizens.
What separates rhetoric from other traditions in the field?
Rhetoric is a creative art, and it's also an area of communication that lends itself to theoretical application. So if somebody is using rhetoric, it means that they are crafting a message, if they are delivering a presentation, or even if they're writing an essay. But it also means that you can use rhetoric to understand messages. So that's different from the way other people might approach communication, where they want to study people's attitudes with a survey or a report, and those attitudes get converted into numbers. That would be like a quantitative approach. A qualitative approach might include doing interviews with people, kind of like this discussion, and finding themes and categories in their responses. So rhetoric is really different because you're looking at either the creation or analysis of public messages, but not in a quantitative or strictly qualitative way.
All right, could you describe a situation where you effectively use one of the rhetorical appeals?
That's a good question. When we need to think about how we put an outward message to our department, we need to think in rhetorical terms. So we need to think about who our audience is, and we need to think about what our message is, and we need to adjust both of those things together. So a couple of years ago, the department started creating alumni profiles where we were looking for testimony from people who had graduated from communication studies and what their degree did for them. And that was an example of how we were using identification and also the credibility, the ethos of our alumni in order to meet current or prospective students that haven't enrolled yet. And that's an ongoing process, but that's one example.
All right, that does it. Thank you for your time.
Good, thank you.
Now let's hear from Josh.
And Josh, thank you for taking the time to join us today as a science researcher. Tell us a little bit about your field of study.
Yeah, so my focus in phenomenology kind of primarily goes towards coaching and how having good communication skills between students and coaching can affect students' overall academic skills and their athletics. The articles that I specifically researched covered on strength and conditioning coaches and how their relationship between head coaches can affect overall students, because strength and conditioning coaches are working one-on-one with students outside of athletic premises. So during the school day, you go and see the strength and conditioning coach. So if you have good communication skills and you're talking face-to-face with that coach, then you're ultimately going to have a good relationship with the team and the head coach overall. Another article that I looked at was the female high school student and how their body image is affected by their head coach, and how head coaches can implement certain standards and certain things in communication where students can feel morally obligated to act a certain way or think a certain way because the coach has put these ideas into their brain. And that is another big thing on how coaches and the one-on-one relationship between students can have such a big effect, which is a big study behind phenomenology. And the final study that I looked at was how the relationship between teachers and coaching, so more specifically student teachers that are coaches themselves and have that dynamic of being in the classroom all day and then going to practices after school and facing that risk of burning out and having one-on-one conversations with students 24/7, and how that can affect the students' premise of wanting to learn and wanting to pursue athletics outside of school when you have that one coach that you're seeing all the time and having communication with.
Transitioning to the sociocultural tradition, I'd like to highlight some research that I've done in the field. So, a Journal of Clinical Nursing, I looked at how nurses and providers deal with patients, and specifically they tried this new tool. It's called SIMS, and it's a technology that basically helps different cultural barriers, whether it be language or shared norms or cultural ethics, you name it, and it's just supposed to make communicating more efficient and effective for everyone. I also looked at caregiving, and there was a really cool study that I looked at about the sociocultural experience and how to manage the stigma related to military caregiving. So this is the roles and responsibilities that care providers have to deal with and navigate with military affiliated individuals and how they cope and manage the adversity. This study tested the sociocultural tradition by examining how the social stigma was constructed through the daily interactions between individuals and within their community on how their identity was shaped and how society viewed them.
The last article I looked at was
the Journal of Higher Education, and it was ways to design effective internships. So they looked at college students and they looked at workplace norms, mentorship, and how satisfied these people were, and also the professional development that was built based on the internship program. So the foundation looked at how culturally we shape an environment, we have these mentoring experiences, and we develop and learn over time from these interactions. So they primarily studied student satisfaction, development value, and career adaptability. And then they also considered the individual's racial identity. So this could either have a positive or a negative impact on their opportunities, the challenges, and the experiences that they face. So this is one way that the sociocultural tradition can be examined based on micro-level interactions within the internship, and it sets the stage for a much broader workplace culture.
Now let's hear from our guest speaker, Ava, and some of her research.
During my time of research, I looked over the Journal of Family Communication, and I came across an article about communication norms within gay adoptive parents, and I noticed that they kind of like to challenge the views of what family is, and that how you don't need a mother and a father, you can just have either or, like you can have two moms, you can have two dads, and it's all the same because it's all love coming from the same people.
That's so true, Ava. Do you want to tell us about another study or some research that you've done in the field?
Yeah, I also came across this article about documented and undocumented immigrants in New York, and in New York, the specific neighborhood in Brookhaven, there's a Preservation Act, and it came about a way for people to express their ideas about identity and legal issues and belonging within a community. And a lot of people use the language of illegal versus illegal, which is very it can be defined as, it can define how someone is seen as an actual community member, and it can be very discriminatory.
Now that we've asked our experts about some experience they've seen in the field, I'd like to wrap up by asking them how they see each of their theories and traditions in everyday life. Ava, can you tell us a little bit about how you see rhetoric on a daily basis?
Yeah, so it's because rhetoric ties into everything that we see in our everyday life, day to day. Persuasion is everywhere that you look. Take a McDonald's billboard, for example. Everything in it is covered in persuasion that affects you, down to the color of the billboard.
Yeah, and what about you, Josh?
When it comes to phenomenology and day-to-day life, you use it when you're talking to people and you're using your experiences to think on prior or future situations and using that information to determine how you feel about those situations.
Adding on to that, I would agree that some of my research I've done on the sociocultural tradition plays a huge part in how we interact with each other based on our day-to-day cultural experiences, social interactions, and then how those construct over time to make a larger reality. Now, how about you, Ava?
In my day-to-day, I see critical tradition all the time. As a lawyer, I deal with multiple cases based off of discrimination in workplaces, based off as race or gender or sexuality, any of that kind of stuff. And I see a strength in as if we didn't have these conversations about discriminatory factors, then there wouldn't be a push for change. And we need change in this kind of society.
And with that, we will wrap up our podcast today. This is Crisis Control, and today we discussed 4 of the 7 communication traditions. We also covered some theories and terms that you should know. We heard from our experts. We want to give them a shout out and a big thanks for giving us some insight today, and I will see you all next time.